Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the dramatic final days and the absolute enduring legacy of Umar ibn Al-Khattab. We're going to see exactly how one man's final moments and the systems he left behind literally shaped the course of history. Let's get right into it. So, I want you to just imagine the scene with me for a second. It's the year 23 AH, or 644 CE. We're standing inside the Prophet's mosque in Medina. Rows and rows of worshippers are lined up, shoulder to shoulder, right in the quiet, peaceful dawn for the Fajr prayer. The whole atmosphere is completely serene, deeply spiritual. And then, in a fraction of a second, that peace is absolutely shattered by a brutal act of violence. Which brings us to a huge question. How does the leader of a massive, expanding empire react when struck down right in the middle of a dawn prayer? Okay, part one, the attack at dawn. Here is exactly how fast this terrifying sequence actually unfolded. Umar, as he always did, was personally walking through the mosque, checking that the rows of worshippers were perfectly straight. He steps up, says the takbir to begin the prayer, and out of nowhere, an assassin strikes. This was a Persian artisan by the name of Abu Lu'lu'a, and he was wielding a poisoned, double-edged knife. He violently stabs Umar multiple times. In the total chaos that breaks out, the assassin just slashes his way through the tight crowd. He ends up stabbing 13 worshippers, and tragically, 7 of them die. Finally, someone manages to throw a heavy cloak over the attacker. Realizing he's completely trapped, Abu Lu'lu'a takes his own life. Just like that, a sacred moment turned into an absolute bloodbath. Which leads us to part two, the assassin's motive. So why did this happen? Well, the assassin, Abu Lu'lu'a, was a captive, but he possessed incredibly valuable skills. We're talking carpentry, blacksmithing, even windmill construction. He actually went to Umar to complain that the daily tax his master imposed on him was just way too high. But Umar, who, as you know, was famous for his uncompromising, strict justice, he evaluated the whole situation and ruled that, given how incredibly lucrative the guy's rare skills were, the tax was actually completely fair. Well, this ruling completely enraged Abu Lu'lu'a. He even muttered a thinly veiled threat to the Caliph not long before the attack. So it really boils down to this tragic collision between a deep personal grievance and Umar's impartial administration. Moving right along to part three, composure in the aftermath. Now, this is the part I find absolutely fascinating. Umar's immediate reaction the second he found out who his killer was. When they told him it was Abu Lu'lu'a, the non-Muslim captive, his very first response was exactly this quote, "Praise be to Allah, who has not caused me to die at the hand of a man who claims to be a Muslim." He actually felt this overwhelming sense of relief. Why? Well, because he knew that if a fellow Muslim had been the one to assassinate him, it could have plunged this newly formed, fragile Islamic empire into a devastating, bloody civil war. Even while he's literally suffering from fatal wounds, his mind is 10 steps ahead, calculating the political and social survival of his people. That is just incredible. And his composure didn't stop there. Right after being stabbed, we're talking bleeding heavily, slipping in and out of consciousness on the mosque floor, he urgently reaches out, grabs the hand of his companion Abdurrahman bin Auf, and literally pulls him forward to finish leading the congregation in prayer. Later on, when they carry him home and he finally wakes up from a faint, do you know what his absolute first question is? Simply, have the people prayed? He even made a point to say, there is no place in Islam for those who leave the prayer. So even as his own life is fading away, his absolute number one priority is making sure the community's spiritual duties are completed. Talk about a staggering level of focus. All right, let's jump to part four, forming the Shura Council. So, staring death right in the face, Umar had to figure out a brilliant transition of power to keep this rapidly expanding empire stable. And instead of just handing the keys over to his own son, which, let's be honest, would have been the standard operating procedure for basically any other empire back then, he firmly rejected dynastic succession. He explicitly told his people that his family had borne enough of the burden of leadership. Instead, he institutionalized this concept of shura. He demanded that the next leader be chosen through a rigorous process of mutual consultation and consensus. Basically, he prioritized collective wisdom over a simple dictatorial appointment, a total game changer. To pull this off, he tasked 6 highly capable companions, all huge, prominent historical figures in their own right, with consulting and selecting the next caliph from amongst themselves. And here's the genius part. He gave them a strict, non-negotiable deadline of exactly 3 days. He fully understood that any sort of prolonged power vacuum would just invite utter chaos. By limiting the choice to these specific respected figures and putting them on a ticking clock, Umar practically guaranteed a stable, structured, and completely legitimate transfer of power. Next up, Part 5, Final Wishes and Advice. Now, looking at his final preparations, you can really see his deep personal fear of dying with unresolved obligations. First things first, he had his sons sit down and calculate all his personal debts, and it came out to a massive 86,000 dirhams. Second, he ordered this debt to be paid off immediately, but he laid out very strict rules. It had to come from his own property first, then his family's, and then his tribes if necessary. He absolutely point-blank refused to let the state cover a single coin of it. And finally, step 3, he sent his son to Aisha, the widow of the Prophet, with one very deeply personal final request. He asked her for permission to be buried in her room, right beside the Prophet Muhammad and his predecessor, Abu Bakr. Now, what's amazing here is that Aisha had actually been reserving that exact spot for herself. But in this incredibly poignant moment of immense respect, she graciously gave up her own reserved burial spot. She granted the dying caliph his ultimate final wish. And finally, Part 6, A Legacy of Justice. Umar was widely known as Al-Faruq, meaning the one who perfectly distinguishes right from wrong. And honestly, while historical views on his leadership can naturally vary across different traditions today, if you look at it objectively, he was the guy who built the absolute foundational, structural framework of Islamic governance. He took what was essentially an ad hoc, newly formed community and meticulously transformed it into a highly organized, functioning state. It's crucial to understand that he didn't just conquer lands, he fundamentally figured out how to govern them. He established the Beit al-Mal, which was a permanent state treasury to handle welfare and public funds. He formulated the Islamic Hijri calendar, grounding it right in the Prophet's migration. And this is huge. He actually separated executive power from judicial power. He created independent courts, known as Qudaa, and appointed dedicated judges. He even instituted a permanent police force, the Ahdath, completely separate from the military, built brand new garrison cities like Kufa and Basra, and, get this, introduced pension systems for soldiers and everyday citizens. We are talking about astonishingly modern administrative systems, and he was implementing the whole shebang back in the 7th century. But what really hits home is that despite building this massive, complex state apparatus, he literally never lost his own intense sense of personal accountability. Listen to this. During a severe famine in Arabia, he flat out refused to eat anything but coarse bread and oil until his skin literally turned pale. He insisted that he had to physically share the suffering of the poorest citizen in his empire. What a bad leader I am if I eat my fill and the people go hungry. For Umar, leadership wasn't some fancy privilege. It was a massively heavy burden, and fundamentally, it was an act of service. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. Think about the independent courts, the state treasuries, the organized police forces, and the welfare pensions that we completely take for granted today. How much of our very own modern understanding of structural governance, justice, and state accountability still echoes the frameworks built by a man out in the Arabian desert over 1,400 years ago? The legacy of Umar ibn Al-Khattab proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that true leadership isn't just about the lands you manage to conquer. It's about the enduring systems of fairness that you leave behind. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep questioning the history that shapes our world.